Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the RAAS mechanism, or basically the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So what exactly is the RAAS mechanism? The RAAS mechanism actually is triggered in response to a drop in blood pressure. And is this mechanism helpful or is it harmful? Well, initially, in the short term, this is useful because whenever the blood pressure drops, the RAS system is triggered to increase the blood pressure. So it is compensatory in mechanism to compensate for the drop in blood pressure. But long term, if it is chronically being activated, then it would harm the cardiovascular system, and there would be chronically hypertension, as well as it is going to affect the renal system. So the baroreceptors usually respond to drop in blood pressure, short, quick reflex action. But for the RAS, it is more long term, and that has detrimental effects. So it's very important to understand that whenever there is a drop in blood pressure, why is the blood pressure dropping? It could be because of internal bleeding, maybe tumor, maybe anemia, maybe some surgery or accident, maybe renal arterial stenosis, or which is the narrowing of the renal arteries. So there could be a drop in blood pressure. So whenever there is a low blood pressure, then RAS is triggered or activated. And once it is activated in response to the fall in the blood pressure, RAS would cause the increase or make the blood pressure to rise. Okay, so RAS has antagonistic or opposite in action. When the blood pressure drops, it works to increase the blood pressure. Now, how does it detect that there is a drop in blood pressure? So basically, there are some macula densa cells, and they are present at the DCT. By DCT, I mean the distal convoluted tubule of the nephron. So these macula densa cells, they would detect there is a drop in sodium retention. So once they detect that there is a drop in sodium retention, basically RAS would be activated. Why? Because RAS is involved in water and sodium reabsorption or retention. The second thing is the sympathetic nervous system, and that would cause the juxtaglomerular cells. The juxtaglomerular cells, they're present in the afferent arteriole, as you know. So these sympathetic nerves would activate the juxtaglomerular cells, and that's how RAS could be activated. And number 3, there are certain baroreceptors that are present at the juxtaglomerular cells, and they could also cause the activation of the RAS system. So these are the detectors. They detect whenever there is a low blood pressure, and they kick off or activate the RAS mechanism to bring the blood pressure up in response to the drop in blood pressure. So next, we are going to see the actual mechanism, how the steps happen, and how the RAS system actually works. So step 1, the condition is that there is a low blood pressure. Okay, there is a drop in blood pressure. So step 1, at the afferent arteriole, we have the juxtaglomerular cells, and they constantly secrete a precursor protein that's called prorenin. This is constantly secreted by the juxtaglomerular cells. So whenever there is a low blood pressure detected by the different methods I just explained, so the juxtaglomerular cells that secrete or produce the precursor protein prorenin, that undergoes cleavage and is converted into active renin enzyme. Okay, so that's the step one. So we get active renin enzyme as the first step. And then once it is released into the blood, step two, at the same time, at the liver, angiotensinogen is secreted. And angiotensinogen, this one is also a precursor protein. And this renin acts upon it to convert it or cleave it. A cleavage happens of the 10 amino acid peptide to convert it into angiotensin 1. And this is inactive. This is inactive. Okay, so renin basically acts on the angiotensinogen that is released by the liver and cleaves it into angiotensin 1, but it is inactive. In the next step, step 3, at the lungs, there is an enzyme that is actually secreted by the vascular endothelial cells of the lungs, and that is called as angiotensin converting enzyme. In short, we call it as ACE. So this is actually secreted at the lungs. Angiotensin 1 is converted into angiotensin 2. This is inactive and this is active, and that is converted by this ACE. So the angiotensin converting enzyme that is actually produced by the liver, by the lungs. So we have 3 steps over here. When there is low blood pressure, it is detected by the 3 detectors which I mentioned. Either of it, they detect it, and then step 1, the juxtaglomerular cells of the afferent arteriole of the kidney that constantly secretes precursor protein, the prorenin, that undergoes cleavage and it forms active renin. In the step 2 at the liver, angiotensinogen, which is again a precursor protein, is cleaved by this renin into angiotensin 1, and this is inactive. So we get renin here, that renin is used over here, we get angiotensin 1, and that is converted into angiotensin 2. This is inactive, this is active, and this is the enzyme that is produced at the lungs. So we get angiotensin 2. So it concludes the 3 steps. In the previous step, we saw how angiotensin 2 is produced, and it is the active one, and how it's going to increase the blood pressure. So the RAAS system is actually a multi-organ endocrine system because it involves both the cardiovascular system, the renal system. It also includes the liver and the lungs. So it has its effect throughout the body. And when we look at the angiotensin 2, what is the short-term useful attribute of it, and then what is the chronic long-term implication, which is more detrimental to the cardiovascular health. So when we look at the angiotensin 2's activity, angiotensin 2, this is active, this is the one that we produce at the end of the previous step, and it acts on the brain hypothalamus to trigger thirst, so that the person will drink water, so that the blood volume will increase. Okay, so it kind of triggers thirst so that the water intake will increase and the blood volume will increase. Then it acts on the pituitary, which is another endocrine gland, and the pituitary would secrete ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone, or also called as the vasopressin. So pituitary would release this, and this would act on the renal cells of the kidney, and it would cause water retention. So when there is water retention, definitely the urine output would become more concentrated. Okay, so that means basically we are holding back water inside the body, and we are just releasing the concentrated urine. So the intention is to increase the blood volume. So here, by drinking water, blood volume is increased, and then retention of water increases the blood volume. And it also acts upon the adrenal endocrine gland, and it causes the zona glomerulosa cells of the adrenal, the zona glomerulosa cells of the adrenal, and it secretes the aldosterone. Okay, aldosterone hormone, and this one acts upon the kidney cells, and it causes sodium retention. It causes sodium retention. That means basically potassium is getting excreted. Okay, we are losing potassium, we are retaining sodium, and then it would also cause the vasoconstriction of the arteries. It will increase the vasoconstriction means the narrowing of the arteries, so that the resistance increases, and ultimately it would increase the blood pressure. So angiotensin 2 in the active form, it is useful in increasing the blood volume and increasing the blood pressure. It does the water retention and the sodium retention, and potassium is basically excreted. So this is how angiotensin 2 would work to increase the blood pressure. That means it would cause hypertension if it remains active for a chronic period of time. Now, basically, what is the pathophysiological effect of this RAAS system? How does it affect the various organ systems? Well, the angiotensin 2, it binds to certain receptors. Okay, it binds to certain receptors. Now there are two types. There is a type 1 and there is a type 2. Mostly it binds to the type 1. Okay, and this is called angiotensin receptor 1. This is the category. It binds to this one mostly, and when it binds over here, it causes vasodilation, the antagonistic or the opposite action, whereas over here it causes vasoconstriction. And in order to achieve this vasoconstriction, it would cause intracellular influx of calcium ions by activating the phospholipase C pathway. I'm not going into the details of it, but it's going to have detrimental effects on the cardiovascular system. So it's going to also cause insulin resistance. Okay, which basically means that insulin is produced by the pancreas, but its uptake by the cells is prevented, resisted. So it also causes the formation of thrombus or clot formation, and that would lead to stroke. So it would also cause arrhythmia, or the beating of the heart is impaired. It would cause renal impairment and atherosclerosis, or the narrowing of the arteries, and plaque formation. So it has several different harmful effects on the cardiovascular system, on the kidneys and on the liver. It's very, very harmful in the long term. So in order to prevent this angiotensin from binding with this receptor. Now, where are these receptors? These receptors are present in the endothelial cells of the arterioles throughout the body. So it's very easy for angiotensin 2, once it is formed, to bind to a receptor. So basically we have to prevent that binding, and that is why there's something called as ARB. Okay, so that is called this angiotensin receptor blockers. These are called blockers. These are drugs. These are drugs which will prevent the binding of it, and in order to safeguard the body from the different cardiac failure or impairment or hypertension. So people usually use the AR blockers. The other one is ACE inhibitors. So ACE inhibitors are also taken as drugs because they would not allow the the angiotensin converting enzyme from working. So we remember the angiotensin converting enzyme, if you remember, it converted the angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. So that step would be cancelled by the ACE inhibitors. So that this is one drug and this is the other drug, the ARB, the blockers. These two would not allow the functioning of the angiotensin 2. Naturally, in our cardiovascular system, we have the atrial natriuretic peptide that is actually released to stop the activity of the angiotensin 2. Okay, so that's naturally done. But people also take these drugs when they have, diabetic nephropathy or kidney impairment, proteinuria, too much of protein spillage in the urine. So that is when the doctors would specify the usage of ACE inhibitors. So basically, RAAS system, it will increase the blood pressure, and the chronic increase in hypertension or blood pressure would cause detrimental effects to the cardiovascular system, the kidneys, and to the overall health of this body, human body. So I hope that you have understood this topic about the RAAS system and the pathological situation and its implication in the different systems. Thank you.